Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a treat. Our treat is we're going to talk to Dave Maher. Dave Maher has done all kinds of very impressive stuff. And instead of me trying to tell you all the things that he's done, we have an expert on Dave Maher, and that's Dave Maher himself. So, hey, Dave, welcome to the show, and let us know a little bit about yourself, or a lot, or however much you want to reveal.
Okay, it's great to be here. I love talking about these kinds of things. I love geeking out and telling stories and stuff like that. I am the CTO of Intertrust Technologies. I've been working with Intertrust since 1999. Before that, I worked for AT&T Bell Labs for about 18 years. And before that, I was a college professor teaching mathematics. And been a mathematician for a while, but mostly been working in the area of what we call secure systems, which includes things like cryptography, but not so much on the cryptography side, but on the side of analyzing systems to figure out how to keep them safe and how to keep the communications among all of the elements in those systems safe. And to that end, I'm also working with the United States AI Safety Institute Consortium to try to figure out how to make AI safe as well. And there is a connection between AI and what we might be talking about today in energy systems, and that is using AI to optimize energy systems. So that's a specific area that I'm focusing on nowadays.
Wow, that sounds like a whole lot of really important stuff. I even noticed that you started out working at Bell Labs in 1981. So, did you know the guys that invented the solar cell? I guess that's 1954 is when they came up with the solar cell, the famous silicon solar cell.
Yeah. Well, I didn't meet those guys, but I met a lot of people in the laboratories and around there. As you may know, and a lot of people know, the famous Bell Labs in Murray Hill, where those guys worked, had a very interesting office arrangement where you had computer geeks and mathematicians like me mixed in with the physics guys and all of the experiments that they would run. So come into work in the morning and then we see the signs on our doors saying no nitrogen or chilled water today, which was something that I never had to worry about, but everybody else in that hallway did.
Uh-huh. Well, that's pretty neat. So it sounds like you've seen a lot of stuff, or it kind of makes me think of Forrest Gump, where he's probably seen a whole bunch of things going back to Bell Labs in the early 80s to now. And I bet you've just seen a whole ton of stuff. Like, could you even imagine AI back then?
Yeah, so AI has been around for a while because we used to call them expert systems, and then it became machine learning, where it's just upping the degree of sophistication, I think, over the years. But there's been a lot of AI going on for a while, depending on how you define the term.
And so you've done a lot of security and stuff, and that sounds like something that's going to be very important for the virtual power plants, the VPPs, coordinating all these different assets, the solar, the energy storage, the electric vehicles, charging things, discharging things, and all of that. So,
Right.
how does that work with the security? I imagine too that there could be people out there that were devious and they could try to discharge every battery all at once and, explode transformers and things like that. So that would be pretty important what you're doing. And so how does all of that work?
I mean, this is probably the most important point about the secure energy systems nowadays. What's happening in the energy spaces and a lot of other places, water systems, as you can imagine, is another example.
Yeah, sure.
In this world of, I guess some people are calling it Internet of Things, more and more things are becoming connected. They're becoming, sometimes we call it hyper-connected, because they're connected in so many ways. You don't even know what's connected to what. And they can even be intermittently connected. I come into somebody's plant and I've got Bluetooth devices on me, and they can communicate with all kinds of things that are inside somebody's plant. And what we're really worried about, and what people worry about in this transition, whereby we have a lot of energy components, everything from floodgates to transformers to, what have you, large batteries, et cetera, is going to be connected. You could conceivably send commands to like say an entire neighborhood and turn everybody's car chargers on or off for that matter. And you can take transformers offline. You could do any number of things if you try to connect them to the internet in the way that we are used to connecting all kinds of things, like our phones or nowadays light switches and anything else that wants to get connected. And we've known from experience that very mundane things like baby monitors, for example, or say security cameras in your house or whatever have actually been attacked by nefarious elements that just put in malware to eventually launch botnet attacks on much larger systems for, ransomware or possibly to create all kinds of mischief. We do see where that kind of thing can happen to potentially take down electrical systems. So far, we haven't brought many of our electrical systems, major components, onto the internet as aggressively as some people might, hope to be able to in order to make it much more automated. But the fact of the matter is that we know that our systems are under attack. We've seen that in the United States and in Canada and other places. So this gets into this area of the integration of operational systems where the people who manage power plants and the major parts of the grid, the various grids that we have, they're often called OT or operational technologists. And they look at all of their energy components as major assets and resources that need to be protected. And they don't think so much about internet connectivity and protecting things from that point of view. And of course, the IT people don't really think in terms of assets and resources being protected. They think in terms of inside or outside of a network. So we've got two very different kinds of cultures that are getting mashed together nowadays. And we have to figure out ways in which everybody can exercise their responsibilities properly. And the people who want to do things like automate major parts of the grid have the ability to bring new energy sources online, even at a moment's notice, or take loads offline, or activate more storage, deactivate storage, et cetera. All of those things are the kinds of things you would want to be able to do with internet technology. But all of those things are things that operational technologists are used to protecting, make sure that no one uses them for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, and so there's SCADA systems and there's internet protocols and all that kind of stuff, and being able to react very fast. Do you see those different applications working for different systems? So like if you have like say a big, multi-megawatt or even gigawatt power plant, renewable energy or not, you want that to be super secure so nobody can hack it. I mean, you even have things like nuclear power plants where if somebody hacked that could have some pretty bad results. So are things sometimes hardwired so they're not involved with the internet? And what would be the preference of something that's very secure versus something that's not as secure?
So in the sort of a new way that we're starting to look at things, we're starting to look at things kind of independent of networks. So you take a resource such as, let's say, a large battery or a transformer or what have you, and you want to be able to use it remotely, but you don't think in terms of, well, what network is it on or off? What you want to do is you want to think in terms of this is a resource, and anybody communicating with it in any way needs to be able to identify themselves and prove their authority for issuing a command or an action request. Then you would very carefully check the identity of who sent the command, and that can be done using cryptographic techniques. And then you also check to see whether or not they have the authority to send that kind of command. So you would check a database or you would check an electronic credential to see, well, I'm satisfied I'm talking to this person, but does this person have the authority to open these floodgates or whatever it might be? And those are parts of the principles of what we call zero trust architectures. And that's a term of art now that is being standardized by a number of different agencies, including the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. They have standards for what are called zero trust architectures and zero trust networks.
Would you say like blockchain and Bitcoin, is that zero trust because you don't have to have a trusted third party?
They're related concepts, actually, but it's not so much that you want to avoid a trusted third party. And in fact, in some cases, the only way of dealing with things is by trusting some party that says, like in the case of the guy who sends a command to open the floodgates, you've got to verify using some authority that they have the authority, they have the right to issue that command. And so you're trusting some element somewhere that makes an assertion that, yeah, Sean White is the person who can do this, or, it's something that we can also implement with blockchain technology. In the case of things like Bitcoin, you can configure blockchains in such a way that you don't have to trust any individual. But in the case of a lot of what we're talking about or protecting systems and implementing zero trust, the zero and zero trust is not negating the idea of trusting anybody at any time. What it really is to say, I'm not going to do what you are asking me to do until I verify that you have the right to do that. And it's probably not a very good name. I don't like the name zero trust architectures, but I think it comes from the idea of not trusting somebody just because they're on your network.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I hear a lot of stuff in the news too about all of our passwords are going to get hacked with quantum computers. Is that hype, or is that something that we really have to worry about?
Well, yeah, we do have to worry about it. There are a lot of people who worry about it. The issue really is that we don't know when somebody's going to come up with a quantum computer that may have the capability that theoretically will appear someday. So right now, there are projections that, we could see such a computer that can break what's called public key cryptography within 5 years. Other people are saying it's 10. Other people say it will always be 5 years from now, whatever the future is. But I mean, there's good reason to worry and to plan, let's put it that way. And there are some standards that are being designed right now to deal with it. And then there's going to be the hard work of retrofitting these new crypto algorithms that are going to be resistant to quantum computing attacks and replacing all of the infrastructure that is already out there that uses the older cryptography. So that'll be an interesting time.
What do you think that would look like when the quantum computing gets to that point? So if it's in 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, would it be something like a couple of passwords get hacked and then they start adapting to it and getting the quantum resistant technologies and, algorithms, passwords and all that stuff in place?
Well, I think that at least the way that we're looking at it in a group that I'm working with called the TEA, which stands for a Trusted Energy Interoperability Alliance, where we're trying to design new protocols for communicating among energy systems, components in energy systems. We're trying to sort of avoid using cryptography that isn't quantum safe to begin with, and then design ways in which we can gradually introduce quantum safe capabilities so that all of a sudden somebody says, oh, there is the capability out there for, say, quantum computing as a service. Somebody puts together a network of quantum computers and makes that available to hackers. That is a situation where hopefully we'd be able to start switching on the completely quantum safe aspects of things. But we want to start without having too much dependency on non-quantum safe things anyway. And that's the approach that we're taking in the Energy Interoperability Alliance that we have.
Yeah, and for me, it's kind of hard to understand some of this stuff. Like I hear that there's some passwords, like some of these blockchain keys and things like that, where there's as many different possibilities as there are molecules in the universe. And to me, that sounds kind of hard to hack. It's like pick a molecule out of the whole universe.
Yeah, well, you can't have passwords that have that property. But what they're referring to there is that the hash function that you are using to, let's say, authenticate somebody, it has 256 bits. And the 2 to the 256 is roughly about the number of molecules in the known universe, or at least the molecules in the closest 500 billion solar systems or something like that.
So that's 256 doublings then.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
exactly. So remember, you're starting with passwords. If you're talking about using hash functions on passwords, it's the number of actual passwords that people can think of. And therefore, let's say an AI guided password cracker can use is far fewer than that. And so that's not going to solve that problem using that kind of technology. And you can use hash functions for determining, for example, whether or not the credential that I just talked about, somebody says, Dave Maher is an employee at Intertrust, just an assertion like that. And that's an assertion that somebody wants to be able to verify. You could hash that with a 256-bit hash and include a date and time, and you can submit that into a blockchain. And that statement won't be easy for somebody to duplicate the existence of that statement or challenge the existence of that statement. So that's actually quite useful. And that's the kind of thing that I think in the future we'll see blockchains used for verifying assertions that people make. And in fact, one of the things that we like about blockchains is that we could conceivably have lots of different blockchains for different kinds of assertions. Assertions that say that, for example, a specific kind of device, let's say a solar inverter or something like that, complies with some security protocols. And those kinds of statements would be difficult to forge using this kind of technology and the hash functions that you were referring to.
So with things like Bitcoin, there's miners out there and they're using a lot of energy and doing all these calculations. And I don't assume that you're going to have your inverters doing all these calculations like that. And so it would be a lot less energy intensive to encrypt these passwords, I'm assuming, and to store things on the distributed ledger and all that.
Yeah, and the reason why you need a lot of energy for Bitcoin is because of the way that they provide an incentive for miners to take part in the Bitcoin network. So the idea there is that a miner gets to participate in a massive, very energy intensive game that uses lots and lots of calculations of many, many different hash functions. And it's kind of almost a mindless competition. But for each block, some miner comes up with a calculation that shows that they get to enter the next block. And that's the way the game is played. And it takes an enormous amount of energy for somebody to produce that block. You don't always have to do that with the kind of blockchains that I'm talking about. The kinds of blockchains I'm talking about, you could have maybe a few different entities that are mutually trusting one another. Maybe they're not trusting one another. Maybe they distrust one another, but they're all making a joint decision that the assertion, for example, that I work at Intertrust, or this is my public key, or whatever assertion I want to make, that assertion is correct. And you don't necessarily need 50,000 miners the way that you have in Bitcoin to do that. You don't need to expend that much energy. But that's just happens to be the way Bitcoin works.
Okay. And when you talk about encryption, a couple of times you've mentioned hashes, and I'm wondering what these hashes are. I know it's not the hash that you have for breakfast.
Right.
So it's like some sort of calculation or something, I guess.
Yeah, it's a one-way function. So you take a statement, it could be a long statement, it could be a document, a string of bits, and you use that as input to a function. And then that function computes a 256-bit, it could be 128-bit, what have you, output. And that's the kind of thing that you actually put in as leaves in a blockchain. And you use it for lots of other things. It's used all the time for passwords nowadays as well. And when I say one-way function, the point is that if you, let's say, take a list of passwords that's stored into, let's say, a server somewhere, you can't go back from the 256 bits to find out what the original password is. So you don't store the password in the server, you store the hash of that password. And then each time you log in to a server, you recompute that hash, and that hash has to match what's in the server. So you can always be assured that, or you should be assured that people aren't going to be able to just use the hash itself as a password. That's not what's happening. You can't go back and reverse that function to find out what your actual password is.
That's pretty neat. So how long have you been doing this kind of like encryption for? Like a long time? Are you one of the originals? I know that
No,
there's
no,
like, they call it a cypherpunk or anything like that.
no. Actually, I go back before, I guess, the cypherpunks, back to the early 1970s, where
Wow.
the first real tough problem that I worked on that involved this kind of technology was to try to provide a means whereby you could trust information coming from a seismic detection bunker in the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, and the Russians, could put bunkers in the United States and send signals back. And you can actually trust the information that would come from those. And that was before even what we now know as digital signatures existed. So that was a pretty fun problem to try to solve without some of the things that I was just talking about, which includes things like public key cryptography.
Wow. Okay.
And the guys who invented public key cryptography, there was a set of them in the sort of classified space in the UK, and working with people at the National Security Agency. And there was a bunch of people at Stanford University named Diffie and Hellman, and a bunch of other people at MIT. I wasn't involved with any of those, but they are brilliant people who came up with this public key cryptography independent of what was happening in the NSA and GCHQ.
Wow. Wow. So I guess you're not Satoshi Nakamoto then?
Definitely not.
Or what is his name? Hal Finney? The other, a lot of people think he is, or, did you know any of these people?
Yeah, I'm aware of them all, but I sort of decided not to try to figure that one out.
Uh-huh.
I do know the guy, Stuart Haber, who Satoshi's paper had referenced when he published his Bitcoin manifesto, so to speak, how to do Bitcoin. And he was an ex-Intertrust employee, and he was also an employee at Belcore as well. And Stuart should get a lot of credit for the use of blockchains for doing things like validating documents and stuff like that, stuff that we're using it for nowadays.
Wow. Wow. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. And so it looks like you've worked for the government, and they've used a lot of your technology and things like that. There's probably, I guess it's stuff you probably can't talk about. So tell us all the government secrets you know.
Yes, well, yeah, I actually never worked directly for the government, but the government did ask Bell Labs to get involved in a design of a vast communication system. And this is where, you talk about scale and energy systems. Back in the early 1980s, the government wanted to have the capability of having 1 million secure nodes, secure spaces, or secure telephones, if you will, that it could also do data communications. And that you never had the capability of doing things like being able to securely communicate among 1 million different points. And so we were called upon to help figure that out. And we did that, we believe, fairly successfully, and had to solve a lot of technical challenges in order to do that. It's very interesting that the motivation to be able to do secure systems actually made a lot of electronics, possible, perhaps earlier than you thought, because I do a lecture on the motivation of technology. And back in the beginning of World War II, or at least the United States participation in it, we had the desire to have communication between the heads of state, Roosevelt and Churchill. And they ended up coming up with the first real digital communication systems in order to do that. But it was kind of clunky in the sense that if you wanted to have a conversation between the two heads of state, you had to record code words on phonographic discs, which were then carried across the Atlantic and could be played back at the other side. And then you spoke in real time and you decoded using the phonographic discs. That was actually the beginning of digital communications.
Wow. And so would you hear it in their voice or it was not in their voice?
So you actually recorded their voice was encrypted with digital code words that were on the phonographic discs. They were added into the voice that was compressed. And then you could transmit that using radio waves, using cable, which we did have a transatlantic cable at the time. And at the other side, you had a copy of those code words on the phonographic disc that I described. And you would use that to decode the information that was transmitted, and you reproduce the compressed voice, and then you uncompress the voice, which is almost exactly what your cell phone does nowadays, except for you don't put the code words on phonographic discs. You have much more sophisticated ways of doing that now.
Yeah, I know that they used Navajo language for during World War II too. So a lot of interesting stuff there. So that was Churchill and Roosevelt.
Yes.
Great. So I was just looking at your LinkedIn profile, and so maybe I'll just read a little part of it here. It says, after joining Bell Labs in 1981, he developed secure communications, information vending, and e-commerce systems. He was the chief architect for AT&T's STU-III secure voice data and video products used by the White House and Department of Defense for top secret communications. So that was a long time ago, I guess. Is any of that stuff still used, or do you still work with them?
No, I don't still work with them. And the specific devices that I helped design are, I'm sure, all out of service nowadays. But they were the forerunners of the stuff that is used nowadays. And hopefully they all worked in the sense that they were never broken. The cryptographic key technology that we use is such that someday somebody's going to be able to break those codes. And we designed the systems to last for, I can't say how many because that's classified, but many years.
Okay, well, we won't torture you to get the answer to this classified information. So you're the CTO at Intertrust. Can you explain a little bit about that, or what would somebody in the renewable energy industry need to contact Intertrust for some kind of project that they're working on?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm working on right now as CTO at Intertrust is the design of what we call a trust model for the Trusted Energy Interoperability Alliance. So that if you can imagine, I mean, the ultimate goal that we have is that, if you've got some sort of component that fits into a distributed energy system, whether it's a solar array, a battery, a bunch of mechanisms that lift rocks in the air to create potential energy, what have you, you could plug it into the system and you could advertise what you could be used for and the conditions under which it could be used. And immediately people could start using it. And you could then be sent commands in a secure fashion, in a trustworthy fashion, whereby that device that you just plugged in can be used in the proper and authoritative way. And so we want to make it very easy for anybody to come up with new helpful ideas or helpful capabilities, plug them into the network and expand it very, very quickly. And then we're talking about literally plug it in and people start using it. So your solar, I got a battery, your solar array has excess electrons being produced. I plug my battery in, you can start using it. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking to be able to do. And what I'm trying to do is provide an architecture for making all of that trustworthy.
So it sounds like a virtual power plant, a VPP?
Yes, that's exactly right. We want to make VPPs safe and trustworthy.
So are you working with VPP? I always call them providers. It's sort of like they provide a service. Are you working with any particular companies that are doing VPPs?
Yeah, so this Trusted Energy Interoperability Alliance I just talked about is a group of consists of Intertrust, but the other participants are companies that provide digital distributed energy systems, including VPPs. And they're interested in deploying an interoperable system for doing what I was just describing. And people could produce devices that could plug into lots of different VPPs and make those VPPs capable as possible.
When you talk about devices, what size of device? Like, is it somebody's solar system on their house? Is it a larger power plant? Is it the world's largest energy storage system? Is it a microwave?
Yeah, no, it would be all kinds of devices of all types. So you've got your energy production systems, wind farms, so the biggest ones nowadays, and solar arrays. But you've also got water-based systems, but you've also got storage systems. And then you've got something that, in some sense, is substitutes for a lot of those, which are variable loads. They're loads that you take offline, and therefore, the energy that would have gone to those loads goes someplace else. And if you think about it, you've got loads, resistors, capacitors, storage, and then you've got inductors. You've got things that convert different kinds of power. And you've got a highly flexible system that could be configured in lots of different ways and can act in lots of different ways. And what we're providing at TEA is what you could think of as a control system for all of those things. Mm-hmm. So that they can talk with one another in a guided way so that you can accomplish something like smoothing a demand curve, which is probably one of the most important aspects of VPPs, where you realize that in Australia, where they're deploying VPPs nowadays, or Texas, you could have the price of energy can shoot up by factors of 10,000. And with VPPs, as you know very well, the idea is to smooth those spikes. And in order to do that, you have to have some sort of intelligence guiding the deployment of signals that say, okay, all you batteries go online, or all you loads go offline for a while, or these water heaters don't need to be heating things at 3 a.m. in the morning, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Great. So would you say that you're controlling devices that are like megawatt scale mostly?
Any scale. Literally any scale.
Like for your house?
In a house, you could have it, for example, you could design the signaling system to ensure that you can share your battery in your car, but also make sure it can be automatically programmed that you've got to get to work in the morning. Mm-hmm. And so you have to have enough charge left in order to do that. And the same thing for hot water storage or cleaning your pool or whatever it might be.
Do you have any kind of connection, or have you worked with any utilities or public utilities commissions? Like, I'm sure that the politics is probably more difficult than the engineering a lot of times, trying to get a VPP mm-hmm. set up.
Right.
Do you work on that end of things at all?
I do not, mm-hmm. but the people that are part of the Trusted Energy Interoperability Alliance have been working with the utilities. In fact, in some cases, they are a utility that regulated in different countries like E.ON in Europe and in Japan. There's JERA as part of TEA. In Australia, there's Origin. And there's, I think I'm blanking on the name of it, but we've got a Korean member, for example. All of these guys are very, very involved in working with the regulators in their respective countries.
And I would think also that besides just turning things on and off or slowing them down, speeding them up, importing and exporting, another really important thing is the power quality, the kind of power, like your power factor, things like grid forming inverters. And so I'm assuming too that probably you would be able to change the settings of some of these big inverters to make the quality of power on the grid better, to do frequency regulation and things like that.
Well, in fact, that's a huge aspect of the security of a lot of these things, because as you know, if you can make the loads go up and down very, very quickly, you're going to pull the frequency out of spec and you'll get transformers shutting down all over the place. And so that is one of the reasons why you need a lot of security for these connected grids, because you can't afford to have an attacker to be able to cause sudden loads, sudden spikes in either direction. That's all part of the risk management aspect of BPPs.
Great, great. So what does your normal day look like? Like where you live, or are you in one particular location? It looks to me almost like I see the background of your picture. Is that the Berkeley Hills? Is that where you are?
Not far from that. This is actually where I used to live. It was a picture off of the deck at San Rafael. The mountain in the background
Mount
is
Tam.
Mount Tam.
Yeah, I recognize
Yes.
Mount Tam. Yeah, that's a San Rafael picture. Great. Yeah. I used to see Mount Tam out of my office decades ago. So
Yeah, it's a magic mountain, as you probably
yeah,
heard.
yeah, great.
But I'm in Philadelphia right now.
Oh, Philadelphia. Great. Okay. And then do you go to any of these solar conferences or anything like that?
I have been attending a lot of conferences. I kind of got out of traveling a lot after, COVID, but I used to go all around the world, mostly in conferences that involved system security,
Mm-hmm.
and also conferences that involved the use of the same kinds of technologies. Ironically, maybe not ironically, but it's interesting that technologies that we're talking about using protecting energy systems and the use of energy systems are also used to protect the distribution of content, in particular entertainment content. And so for years, I worked on that aspect of information security.
Oh, so people don't steal movies.
That's right. Yeah. Or, talking about protecting assets, you've got $1 billion asset, which is a movie nowadays. And somehow or another, you want to make sure that you're able to use that asset and somebody else doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of people in different countries that are figuring out workarounds for that.
Yeah.
Great. So let's see. Anything else that you think we should talk about?
We talk about all kinds of things. I think that the one thing that I'm starting to talk a little bit about more nowadays is getting more people understand the importance of what it is they're trusting and not trusting. The more that you're connecting things to the internet, and now, for example, I have a grandchild she's connected to the internet now because she just got her first phone. And how do we think in terms of protecting these valuable assets that we have? And in internet technology terms, we depend on experts to do that. The IT experts are these geek-like people who you give them the responsibility for protecting your networks. And I don't think that works anymore. You can't just delegate security to somebody else. You got to have what I would call a human-centric way of saying, I got an asset. Do I understand how it's protected? And when we start thinking about energy systems, and everybody understands that they're connected to an energy grid, and there are things that, if things go wrong, they're really screwed for a while. The food in the refrigerator goes bad or whatever it might be. What's really protecting them? And I'm just thinking that we need to figure out better ways of getting people to appreciate that as we become a more connected world, how do we ensure that all of the different assets that we have are protected from nefarious purposes? And that's what we're looking at in the AI world nowadays, these so-called dual-use technologies. AI can be used for good to help, like I say, smooth the cost curves for energy systems. And on the other hand, it can be used for bad by actually helping the attackers of those systems. There are a lot of topics out there that we can get into. But
Great, great. So as far as people listening to this podcast, is there any particular ways that you can help them or that they should give Intertrust a call? Like what would make them call Intertrust and figure out how to make everything more secure?
Yeah, so I think that anybody who's involved in the distribution of energy has responsibility for the advancement of more efficient ways of deploying distributed energy capabilities. And wants to know a lot more about how the systems that can communicate all of these operational technology systems, the SCADA systems and things of that sort that are used. I think contacting Intertrust for to find out what kind of technologies are available for protecting those systems. It's not just stuff that we have at Intertrust, but all of the stuff that the partners in the TEA Alliance also are designing and starting to deploy. We could tell you stories about how to do that and about how to protect your systems and doing it in an interoperable way without having to reinvent a lot of fairly sophisticated technologies yourself.
Great. And so it looks like you've been at Intertrust for almost 26 years as the CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And how can people find Intertrust and how can people find you?
Well, I'm DPM at intertrust.com, and you can visit our website. And you can also visit the TEA Alliance. It's trusted-energy.org is the name of the...
Trusted-energy.org.
That's
Great.
correct.
Great. And we'll put all this stuff in the show notes too. And you're pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. And that's Dave or David Maher, Maher. And isn't there a comedian with your last name? You're probably not related to him. Yeah.
I am not related to him. He pronounces his name differently.
Yeah. And if you were, you probably wouldn't admit it either, I guess. Huh? It might not be good for business, but I do think he's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast here and spreading all of your knowledge and making our world more secure.
Thanks very much. It's been great talking with you, and hopefully we'll meet again soon.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com. Get yourself NABCEP certified, learn a lot more, and listen to more podcasts.